I had just come home from work when something in the mailbox caught my eye. A pink envelope covered in tiny hearts was wedged between bills and flyers, almost glowing like it wanted to be found. For a second, I actually smiled, thinking Mark had surprised me for once. But the smile slipped the moment I recognized his handwriting, the familiar loop of the M I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for years. My stomach tightened before I even touched it. Something felt wrong, like my body understood the truth before my mind did. When I read the name on the front, my heart dropped so fast it felt physical. To Isabella. From Mark. His name, surrounded by a red heart, addressed to a woman I had never heard of. I stared at the envelope, my fingers going cold, my wedding ring suddenly heavy on my hand. I whispered the name, barely able to get it out. Isabella. Who was she? Why was my husband writing Valentines to someone who wasn't me? A tremor ran through me as fear mixed with something darker. Part of me wanted to put it back, close the mailbox, and pretend none of this existed. But pain doesn't let you retreat. It pushes you forward, even when you're shaking. I tore open the envelope with a desperation I didn't recognize in myself. Inside was a romantic card dripping with affection, the kind I used to dream he'd give me someday. My love, these last few months with you have been the happiest of my life. Tonight will be unforgettable. The words blurred through my tears, each one carving a new wound. My husband wrote a Valentine, just not for me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, hinting that whatever came next wouldn't be gentle. My hands were trembling as I stood in the entryway, still holding the card like it might burn me. The house felt too quiet, too still, as though it was waiting for my reaction. I kept reading the words inside, hoping they might rearrange themselves into something harmless, something explainable. But there was no misunderstanding a message like that. My love. The happiest months of my life. Tonight will be unforgettable. Each phrase felt like a slap from someone I thought I knew. I sank onto the couch, clutching the card, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. There's a very specific kind of heartbreak that steals your voice first, then your strength, and then your ability to believe anything good ever came from the person who caused it. My mind raced backward, replaying late nights, sudden work emergencies, and all those moments he insisted I was paranoid. I had defended him. I had believed him. And the reality hit me with a force that knocked the air from my chest. He wasn't who I thought he was. I looked down at the handwriting again, tracing the familiar lines with a shaking thumb. How long had this Isabella existed in our marriage? Was she someone passing through his life? Or someone he wished had replaced me? Those thoughts made my stomach twist, a sickening mix of dread and fury rising in equal measure. I felt my heart hardening in real time, like it was protecting itself the only way it knew how. And as I sat there with that pink envelope on my lap, I realized this wasn't just a mistake to confront. This was the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I stood up slowly, still gripping the card, because I knew that once I set it down, I'd have to face what it meant. My legs felt unsteady, like they were carrying a version of me that didn't exist an hour ago. I walked to the kitchen on instinct, needing something solid to hold on to, but even the countertop felt foreign under my palms. My world had shifted, warped into something unfamiliar and sharp. I stared out the window, watching the quiet street, wondering how many people had gone through something like this, and somehow survived it. The words inside the card kept echoing like a cruel chant in my mind. Happiest months. With you. Tonight. Was that where he was planning to go while I sat at home waiting for him? I felt the tears again, hot and relentless, but this time I didn't wipe them away. Pain deserved space. It deserved to be acknowledged, not tucked away like an inconvenience. And beneath the hurt, something else began to stir. an anger that made my heartbeat steady instead of frantic. I wasn't falling apart. I was waking up. I picked up the envelope again and held it at eye level, forcing myself to take in every detail, every heart, every flourish, every piece of proof that my marriage wasn't as real as I believed. Maybe the universe had thrown this card into my mailbox for a reason. Maybe I was meant to find it before he had the chance to lie his way into another excuse. And as that thought settled into me like a cold truth, I realized I wasn't afraid of confronting him anymore. I was afraid of what I might learn next. I heard the front door open that evening, the sound hitting me like a warning bell instead of the comfort it used to bring. Mark walked in humming, completely oblivious, holding a bouquet of flowers like he was stepping into a romantic movie scene. I watched him from the living room doorway, the envelope tucked behind my back, my heartbeat steady in a way that surprised even me. He grinned when he saw me, all warmth and confidence, as if he were the man I once trusted. "Surprise, baby. Happy Valentine's," he began, but his voice faded the second I lifted the envelope into view. The flowers slipped slightly in his hand, and his smile cracked at the edges. "Who's Isabella, Mark?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm for what I was feeling inside. His face drained of color, and he stammered, "What? Where did you get that?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, him acting like the problem was where I found the evidence, not what the evidence was. I held his gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. "Our mailbox," I said. "You wrote her a love letter. You called her my love." Immediately, he lunged toward the first lie he could grab. It's for work. A colleague. A joke." Hearing him say that made something inside me snap cleanly, like a wire pulled too tight. "A joke?" I repeated. "You write love letters to coworkers? Is that the joke, Mark?" He scoffed, rolled his eyes, snapped back with that familiar tone he used whenever he wanted me to doubt myself. "Stop overreacting. You always blow things out of proportion." But I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I just let the silence hang between us, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the truth he had been hiding. I stood there watching him unravel, and it was almost surreal, like seeing a stranger wearing my husband's face. The Mark I once knew would have at least tried to reach for honesty, but this version of him clung to lies like a lifeline. He kept pacing, running a hand through his hair, muttering excuses that sounded thinner every second. I realized then that he wasn't trying to save us. He was trying to save himself. And that hurt more than the envelope ever could. I felt my chest tighten, not with grief this time, but with clarity. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like that alone could make his lie sound more believable. "Elena, listen, you're making something out of nothing," he insisted, waving his hands as if the card didn't exist. I watched his mouth move, but I no longer recognized the man behind the words. His explanations twisted and stretched, bending reality until it almost snapped. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't admitting anything. He was gaslighting me in real time, the same pattern I'd ignored for years because I loved him too deeply to see the cracks. Now those cracks felt like canyons. When his frustration peaked, he pointed at the envelope as if it had betrayed him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're acting crazy." The moment he said that, something inside me settled with a quiet, cold certainty. I wasn't crazy. I was awake. And his anger only revealed his guilt more clearly. I let the silence stretch between us again, watching him squirm, watching him drown in his own panic. For the first time, I understood that the man standing in front of me wasn't someone I could trust. And as that truth sank in, I knew I wasn't done uncovering what he'd been hiding. I watched him struggle for a version of the story that made him look innocent, but every word he threw into the air just made the room feel heavier. The more he talked, the more I realized how rehearsed he sounded. like this wasn't the first time he'd had to spin a lie into something pretty. My hands were steady now, almost unnervingly so, as if my body had decided to protect me from the chaos he created. I wasn't his audience anymore. I wasn't his believer. And with each passing second, the truth pressed harder against my ribs, demanding to be faced. He tried softening his tone next, stepping toward me with that carefully crafted gentleness he used whenever he wanted me to forget his faults. "Elena, come on. Let's just calm down," he whispered, reaching for my arm. I stepped back before his fingers could touch me, and the hurt on his face wasn't heartbreak. It was annoyance. He wasn't losing me. He was losing control. And there was something liberating in seeing it so clearly. For years, I'd mistaken manipulation for misunderstanding, excuses for effort, and his defensiveness for love. But now I saw every pattern for exactly what it was. He finally went silent, realizing words weren't working on me anymore. For a moment, all I could hear was his uneven breathing and the quiet hum of betrayal that had settled into the walls of our home. I held the envelope between us like a mirror he couldn't look away from. "I don't believe you," I said softly, and the truth of it rang through my whole body. His eyes flickered with something: fear, guilt, anger, maybe all three. And in that moment, I knew I needed answers he would never willingly give me. Answers I could only find elsewhere, once he fell asleep. When Mark finally drifted off to sleep that night, his breathing deep and slow, I lay beside him wide awake, staring at the ceiling. My body felt frozen, but my mind was sharp, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. I waited, counting every inhale he took, feeling the weight of the envelope burning through my memory. The room we once shared as a sanctuary felt unfamiliar now, like a stage where he had been performing and I had been the only one who didn't know. When his snoring finally steadied, I slipped out of bed, quiet as a ghost. I reached for his phone on the nightstand, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. I didn't want to find anything, but I already knew I would. People don't write love letters to colleagues. They don't call betrayal a joke. And the truth was waiting just behind that lock screen. When I opened his messages, it felt like a trapdoor opened beneath me. Thread after thread, lie after lie, dozens of texts glowing against the dark room. "I can't wait to see you tonight. She'll never find out. Don't open the card until we're together." Each message cut deeper, each one a confession he didn't mean for me to read. My breath hitched as I scrolled, my eyes burning but dry. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come with sobs. It comes with a silence so heavy it feels like sinking. I murmured to myself, barely audible, months of lies, while I was here cooking, loving you, defending you." My thumb hovered over a message that mentioned the name again, Isabella. And then I saw where she worked, a downtown restaurant. The same restaurant Mark had always claimed to hate. My stomach tightened, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was something fiercer, hotter, something that felt like the beginning of a line he didn't know I was about to cross. I kept scrolling, each message adding weight to a truth I could no longer ignore. There were photos too, nothing explicit, but intimate enough to make my chest ache. A picture of their hands intertwined across a table. A blurry shot of a wine glass she must have sent him. A selfie of her smiling, the kind of smile a woman gives a man she trusts. Seeing those images felt like being punched in places I didn't know a heart could bruise. And the worst part? None of it surprised me anymore. Betrayal always leaves breadcrumbs. I had just never wanted to follow them. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the glow of the phone lighting my face while Mark slept inches away, oblivious to the world he had shattered. I stared at him, really stared, and he looked different now. Smaller, weaker, like the illusion had finally cracked wide open. This wasn't the man I fell in love with. This was a man who built 2 lives, and expected me to live quietly in the shadow of the better one. The anger rising inside me didn't feel wild or chaotic. It felt controlled, measured, almost surgical. That scared me, but it also empowered me. When I saw the texts about their plans, specific times, whispered promises, the confirmation that they were meeting again soon, something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman standing at the edge of a truth she refused to look away from. I closed the messages one by one, letting each betrayal settle like a final nail in a coffin he built with his own hands. And as I set the phone back down, careful not to wake him, one thought rose above the heartbreak, clear and cold. If he wanted to build a life with her, then he could lose everything with me. I stood in the dim hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the night while my pulse hammered in my ears. The house felt different now, colder, heavier, as if it finally revealed the secrets it had been forced to hold. I replayed every message in my mind, every lie he'd whispered to me, every moment he pretended to be tired while he was really busy loving someone else. The version of me who trusted him without hesitation felt far away, almost like a stranger I used to know. And maybe she needed to disappear for who I was becoming to take her place. I walked to the bathroom and splashed water on my face, watching the reflection staring back at me. My eyes were red, but not from crying. They were sharp. Awake. There's a moment in betrayal where pain stops being something that crushes you and becomes something that shapes you instead. That's where I was standing, right on the edge of that shift. I thought of Isabella, of the restaurant downtown, of the lies Mark fed both of us. And for the first time since picking up that envelope, I felt the weight of fear lift from my shoulders. As I wiped my face with a towel, a cold whisper formed on my lips before I even realized I was speaking. "You chose her? Fine. Let's end both of you tonight." The sound of my own voice startled me, steady and determined in a way it had never been. I wasn't thinking of revenge as drama or fury. I was thinking of truth, accountability, exposure. If Mark could build a double life, then I could shatter it. And with that thought anchoring me, my next step seemed obvious. I knew exactly where I had to go. The next evening, I drove to the restaurant with my heart steady and my hands cold on the steering wheel. The city lights blurred past me, but my mind was clear, sharp enough to cut through every lie Mark had told. I parked across the street, watching couples walk inside, laughing, unaware of the storm I was carrying with me. I knew he didn't expect me. Men like Mark never imagine the wife they underestimate will be the one to expose them. I took a deep breath, smoothed my jacket, and stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of the pink envelope tucked inside my bag. Inside the restaurant, the scent of roasted garlic and warm bread wrapped around me, a cruel contrast to the cold purpose in my chest. Candlelight flickered across tables filled with smiling faces. And then I saw him. Mark sat at a cozy, romantic table, 2 wine glasses, a candle between them, and Isabella's hand resting comfortably in his. She laughed at something he said, and I felt my jaw tighten, not from jealousy, but from the insult of his carelessness. He didn't even look over his shoulder. He was that sure I'd stay in the dark. I walked toward them slowly, each step grounding me, strengthening me. The moment Mark looked up and recognized me, his entire body jolted like he'd seen a ghost. The blood drained from his face, and he shot to his feet so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Elena, what are you doing here?" he choked out. Isabella's smile faltered, confusion turning into unease. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me as I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "Delivering your Valentine's card," I said, meeting both of their eyes. "You left it in the wrong mailbox." Mark's mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a lie quick enough to save him, but nothing came out. Isabella turned to him, her face draining of color as the pieces snapped together. Mark, you said you were separated, she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to expose how deeply she'd believed him. I watched his panic rise in real time, watched the man who always controlled every narrative suddenly lose his grip on all of them at once. And for the first time, I felt the power shift in my favor. I wasn't the wounded wife anymore. I was the truth he could no longer outrun. He stepped toward me, hands up as if I were the one causing chaos in his perfectly planned evening. "Elena, please, let's talk outside. Not here," he hissed under his breath, trying to plaster on a fake, polite smile for the nearby tables. But I didn't move. I didn't lower my voice. I wasn't going to help him save face. "No need," I said brightly, turning just enough so the nearest diners could hear. "Everyone here should know who you really are. A liar with terrible handwriting." Gasps rippled through the room. Forks paused midair. Conversations froze. His humiliation spread across his face like fire. Isabella pulled her hand away from him slowly, as though touching him had suddenly become dangerous. "You lied to me," she whispered, each syllable sharp enough to cut. Mark reached for her, then for me, torn between the life he'd built in secret and the one he'd shattered in public. And standing there under the warm glow of the restaurant's lights, it struck me how small he looked. Not just guilty, but exposed in a way he had never been before. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply watched him crumble, letting the weight of his choices finally fall on him. And deep inside, a quiet certainty told me this moment was just the beginning. Mark kept glancing around the restaurant, desperate for an exit that didn't exist. Every pair of eyes on him made his shoulders inch higher, his confidence shrinking with each second. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. How to spin this, how to blame me, how to salvage whatever fantasy he'd built with Isabella. But there was no strategy left for him. Not here. Not with both of us standing in the same room, holding the truth he thought he'd buried. I watched him swallow hard, as though the lies were finally too thick to breathe through. A server stepped back from our table, unsure whether to intervene or run, and that awkward shuffle only amplified the tension. I kept my voice steady, my spine straight, refusing to give him even a sliver of control. "You told her you were separated," I said calmly, looking at Isabella. "Is that what he said the first time he kissed you? Or just when he needed to explain why he still went home every night?" Mark reached for the back of his neck, rubbing it the way he always did when he was cornered. But there was no door, no story, no escape big enough for this. As the silence grew heavier, I felt something inside me settle, like the final puzzle piece had snapped into place. I wasn't here to rage or to fight. I was here to reveal. To expose the man he'd become in the dark while pretending to love me in the light. I took a step back from their table, letting the envelope rest between my fingers like a closing argument. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said softly. "It's the last one you'll ever spend with me in your life." And as I turned toward the exit, I knew exactly what awaited me next, a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The next morning, the house felt strangely calm, as if it were finally breathing after holding its breath for too long. I woke up alone, something that should have hurt, but instead felt like relief brushing against my skin. The pink envelope sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, a reminder of where everything unraveled. I made myself coffee, the simple act grounding me, marking the first moment in months that belonged entirely to me. And while the bitterness filled the air, I realized I didn't miss him. Not even a little. I was packing his suitcase when I heard the front door open. Mark walked in, looking as though he hadn't slept, his face pale, his eyes frantic. "Elena," he said, breathless. "I made a mistake. Don't throw everything away." I paused, my hand hovering over one of his shirts, and looked at him with a clarity that felt like armor. For years I had begged for honesty, for effort, for respect. and all he had given me were excuses disguised as love. Now he wanted forgiveness dressed as panic. It was too late for both. He stepped closer, reaching for the suitcase like he could stop the inevitable with sheer force. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, desperation cracking his voice in a way lies never had. I closed the suitcase with a firm click that echoed through the room. "Try Isabella," I said, turning to face him fully. "If she still wants you after last night." His shoulders collapsed inward, the weight of his double life finally resting entirely on him. And standing there, watching him unravel, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, freedom beginning to take shape. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he still expected the Elena who forgave too quickly, who quieted her instincts, who accepted half-truths packaged as apologies. But that version of me had died the moment I opened that pink envelope. "Elena, please," he begged, taking a step forward. "I can fix this. I swear, I can fix it." I let out a breath, not a sigh of sadness, but one of disbelief. Fixing something requires honesty. He hadn't even taken the first step toward that. He reached out, fingers trembling, maybe hoping touch alone could rewrite the past. I moved away before he could lay a single hand on me. The shock on his face was almost insulting, like he genuinely believed I'd crumble the second he looked at me with those pleading eyes. "You don't get to touch me," I said quietly, the words steady and unshakable. It felt powerful to say them, to mean them. For so long, I let him define the rhythm of our marriage. Now, I finally felt the rhythm of my own voice returning. He swallowed hard, leaning against the wall as if the truth was too heavy to stand under. "I messed up," he whispered. "I know I did, but don't throw away our life over one mistake." The audacity of that line almost made me laugh. One mistake? Months of betrayal. A second Valentine's Day with another woman. Lies crafted so beautifully he probably believed them himself. I didn't argue with him. I didn't need to. I only looked him in the eyes, letting him see what his choices had turned me into. A woman who wasn't asking for answers anymore. A woman who was done. He tried again, his voice cracking as he reached for one last scrap of control. "Elena, we can start over. I'll do better. I'll change." I didn't answer right away. I just zipped the suitcase and pushed it toward him, the wheels rolling across the floor like a final verdict. "Love letters have consequences, Mark," I said, my voice low but steady. "You wrote one to someone who wasn't your wife. That was your choice. This is mine." He blinked rapidly, guilt and panic colliding behind his eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity. No sorrow. Just closure. He hovered in the doorway, suitcase in hand, as if waiting for me to break and tell him to stay. But I stood still, arms crossed, my heart strangely calm. When he stepped forward like he might hug me, I moved aside, and he froze. That hesitation, his shock at my refusal, told me everything about the marriage I had been living in. He only valued what he thought he couldn't lose. Now he'd lost it. "Get out of my house," I said softly, not out of anger, but out of finality, a line drawn, permanent and clean. He walked out with nothing but the humiliation he'd earned, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, letting the weight of everything slip from my shoulders. Then I did something small but revolutionary. I bought myself flowers. Bright ones. Ones he never would have chosen. I set them on my table, poured myself a glass of wine, and felt the first breath of a new beginning settle in my chest. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was freedom. And it was finally mine.